And we're on the air.
Hey, Paul Bond.
Yeah, how's it going, Jim?
Good. We're coming to the end of week one of Wire 106, and there's a lot of people strewn about the internet trying to figure out what the hell is happening.
Yeah, people are getting
33,
on board.
and they are. We have onboarded already at least 27 of the students at Mary Washington are pretty much in the Wire 106 tagged core site, and we still have six more we have to locate. I don't know where they are. Maybe they're deep undercover.
Yeah, could be.
So far so good. Today we're going to discuss not only episode 9, which is Game Day, and the title comes apparent once you see the episode, but also we're going to talk a little bit, like you said, about our method. Like, how do we watch these, and how do we prepare not only for our discussions, but for our blog posts we might write about it, and etc. So we'll talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
But in terms of this episode, where do you want to start? I'll leave it up to you, and then I'll riff off you.
Yeah. Well, let's start with process.
Okay.
That's what I do. Um, I typically sit on my couch and watch the episode straight through, like normal people do. Um, and then, maybe later that day or next day or whatever, I'll go through it watching it in an MPEG stream clip.
Yeah.
With the earphones on, so I can pick up all these details. And then if I see a nice scene, I'll pause it, and in that program you can export a frame. Um, if it's a good shot, if it's a good scene, you can select in, select out, and pick the section you want, and export that to a video, or maybe if I just want the sound, export to audio.
Yeah. That's a good point, and it's a good point to bring up MPEG Streamclip because that's an application that's going to be really valuable in this class for doing anything with videos or GIFs, or just like you said, capturing frames. And that's a free application you can download. You can just search MPEG, M-P-E-G, Streamclip, and I think it's square5.com. I think that's the actual site you can find it. It's an open source or freeware application made in Italy. And play with MPEG Streamclip. Great recommendation, and it's similar to what I do. But please go ahead.
Yeah, and I don't know. I see lots of controls in there, so I can only guess how much it can really do beyond what I use it for.
Well, actually, a lot of what I think MPEG Streamclip's greatest use is you can select in and out particular scenes of an episode. So a lot of what I do is I'll watch the episode. And I'll actually stop it while I'm watching it. So and I'll grab strips of it. And so I'll want to talk, say, about the Lester Freeman scene in episode 9 where he's talking about following the money and how important the money is. You follow the drugs, you get drug dealers. You follow the money, you don't know what the hell you're going to get, right? And so that whole scene is great because he has Sid Nor and Prez going to the kind of various official offices and figuring out who owns what, and he's going to the elections board. And so that's a great scene. Again, it's Freeman training these two cops on how to think and follow like policemen and how to do good police work. So I'll stop that clip, I'll talk about it in my post, and then I'll embed it as a kind of clip that people can watch and reframe off the stuff. I take the clips, like I like the clip of Stringer Bell and Avon in the beginning of this episode when they're up above the basketball court and they're looking down. It's as if they're in the big boardroom making decisions, right?
Yeah.
Decisions that come back to haunt them at the end of the episode. So I'll actually watch it. I'll have seen the episode once or twice before, and when I watch it for clips and for images that I find important. And unlike you, I really like the way you read it so closely visually and design-wise. I usually try and read it, and sometimes it works better than others, but I try and read it for broader kind of themes. Like when Herc is on the roof and he's like, maybe we won. And it's that kind of referencing back to Carver when he's talking about the endless drug war. He's suggesting maybe the drug war is over, which is kind of a joke. But it's also, if you think about the relevance of 9/11 constantly in this, it's a foreshadowing of what's going to happen with Mission Accomplished in 2003, with this idea that we actually won the Iraq War when it just started, and we're still feeling the dramatic effects of that kind of misguided war in Iraq. So there's actually a lot of different ways for me to. I usually get going on political or cultural allusions that I follow through, and that's usually where my blog posts go.
Yeah, because you come at it from like the literary background, and I'm coming at it from the art school background, so we got it covered
And
either way.
And it's interesting because that's only two ways. People can take it from the sociology background, from maybe the sciences background. I mean, and that's really up to anyone who's doing this to take it from their background, because one of the theories I have about The Wire is that it's a rich enough show that it probably wouldn't leave too many people deplete of ideas of how they can kind of interpret it for what their view or vision is, whether that's your military, law enforcement, a sociologist, etc. There would be something for you.
Yeah, there's actually a whole book about The Wire and philosophy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
cool. That's cool. We should actually get that, shouldn't we? No, and I think the process is interesting, and I'm finding, my process now is I'm trying to kind of read for bigger questions of not only like the bigger cultural issues, but also the smaller visual details that you've brought up. So your readings have affected mine, and I can point to that in some of our discussion this episode. But I'm hoping as the students get on board and they get comfortable, their readings are going to inform my readings, and that's going to start to blur, because I think that's the whole point of this class.
Yeah, because they're going to be coming at it from a different perspective too, just like age-wise,
Well,
because
absolutely. Yeah,
they're
and
going to
all of
be
our
kids.
different backgrounds, right? And Lakeisha, who I was speaking with, who's a student in the class, and she's been following, and she asked today, where's episode discussions of 7, 8, and 9? Because she's caught up. And she's like, I would love to hear more about Ferguson in relationship to the stuff that you're talking about with The Wire, and she's absolutely right. I mean, we talked about it in episode 2 when the kid gets kind of brutalized with the butt of Prez's gun by Prez Belusky, who kind of abused. And there's a lot of relevance, and it really is resonant. So I love that, and I think next week and the weeks beyond, we're going to bring students in for these very discussions and to actually start bringing in these questions and these viewpoints. That there's a lot that we maybe capture, but there's a ton in these video discussions that we miss, and that's the point.
Yeah. All right. Well, we should probably get into looking at the episode itself.
I think so.
Yeah. I took a lot more random approach to it this time around. Like, I really just looked at images and what we could do with them. But this is actually one of the early ones in the episode, and I kind of like this. So let me share my screen here. It's a picture of D'Angelo in the couch. And maybe it doesn't mean anything, but I look at this and see a couple things going on here. Like, he's not in the couch anymore. He's like on a chair outside it. And is that significant of something? But then just color-wise, I look at this, and like, this is probably my art background there. But the blue of the chair there is sort of like the opposite of the orange of the couch. If you look at it on a color wheel, they're going to be in the opposite sides. It's like a complementary color. And to me, it's showing a separation. Like he doesn't belong in the couch. He doesn't belong in the game. He's not part of that orange crew, or trying not to be.
Yeah, and it's starting to come true very much more and more as it goes on.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the ones early on, so I'll throw that image back, and I've already mentioned it a bit, and maybe I can look at it quickly here, is one of the ones that struck me as I was watching this is the one with Stringer Bell and Avon, and they're talking about the basketball player because they're getting ready for the big game. And I love this shot because it's Avon and Stringer Bell, who's, Stringer Bell is his right-hand man, and he has his own ideas about running it. And you got the trophies there, and you also have them in kind of like this boardroom looking down. And this, just for me, was an interesting shot as you're watching the basketball player who they ultimately pay $10,000 to come play so they can finally beat the East Side, comes up, and they're watching him. And then you have the coach who gets $5,000 for the actual brokering the deal, and then another 5,000 for the program. And it's interesting thing about this one is everybody's on the take, right? Like everyone's on the take. You know, this is the kind of corporate boardroom. They're the ones who are paying out everybody. It's interesting to see them in a different way, particularly how much focus in this episode is on following the money and bringing it to bigger people like politicians, like corporations, right? And that's the thing where this kind of show starts to go off the rails from a typical you caught the perpetrator, it's over. You know, the drugs, no one really cares about the drugs. They're a front for something else. And they're a front for the money and the corruption. Yeah. And so I really like that element, and it follows through for me throughout this episode. So that's the cultural kind of reading I was having each time in relationship to Bush, in relationship to 9/11, in relationship to the Iraq War, the war that won't end, the war on drugs, and a lot of what we heard already in terms of the FBI and this kind of focus on a completely different notion of terror and terrorism.
Yeah. Another thing I liked about that scene up in the boardroom is, like, while they're watching this game, they're also discussing Omar, you know, and he's pulling money out of Avon's pocket, basically. Yeah. And then at the end of the scene, you know, you've got the coach there saying, you know, there should be $5,000, you know, for the program, and then, oh yeah, and $5,000 for me too.
Right.
You know, like, he's pulling money out of his pocket too, but Avon's fine with that, you know.
Yeah, exactly. But Avon kind of has this look, right, where he's like, nothing's free, right? Like he talks about, like, yeah, it's kind of funny. He's not overly upset necessarily, but there's still that sense of, you know, he understands how it's played. And Stringer Bell giving him pretty bad advice in this scene, saying, you know, play low on Omar, you know, we're going to let him lay low, make a deal, and then when he comes out, we're going to crush him. But in fact, you know, Omar's out for him. Omar's on the hunt, as we learn at the end of this episode.
Yeah, yeah. So I had this other scene related to that basketball scene. And let's see if this will play for me. It's the scene at the basketball court, and it sort of scans across his whole crew there. But I looked at that, and it's just a quick scene. I thought of that chess metaphor that they talked about early on. And there's Avon and Stringer, like the king and queen, in the middle of the lineup there.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. Yeah.
And you got, like, you know, you got the knight in Weebay, or potentially the rook, or whoever, like, you know, you have all the players lined up. That's, wow, I like that a lot.
Yeah, yeah. I was trying to, it's been so long since I played chess, but I think, like, they're in those same positions, like right and left, king and queen, you know?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it really does go also with the game metaphor, that it keep coming back with that and likening the game to the game. And so here's yet another game, right?
Right, yeah.
And it's also interesting his relationship with Avon and Prop Joe, who we meet for the first time. It was a great character, yet another great character in The Wire. And we meet Prop Joe, this is his debut episode. And it's interesting how they both know the game is rigged. And they're trying to rig, like, they understand that they're both bringing in ringers to win. And there's also that understanding, like, you know, that they're both cheating. And it seems to somehow find its way displaced on the ref, right? So it's a terrible way for the poor ref, but it's this weird moment.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, the ref sort of realizes that he actually doesn't have authority over this game, you know?
And, like, if he really did what Avon was saying he should do, where would he be? He'd be dead. Right? Like, don't let me get in your face, don't let me talk, and then it's like, wait a second, you know? Like, what am I going to do? I'm in a completely no-win situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, picking up on some of the stuff you've talked about, I'm interested and I'm finding these details. Here's a detail of not only the surveillance, and this is Carver and Herc watching D'Angelo get on the phone, but this is also the moment where you see those two statues in the background, which come up again and again as a kind of a figure to kind of place you, but also potentially a metaphor of another moment. Um, but it's interesting because there's that scene, which I kind of come back to because we've talked about them. But that follows on this scene where we have Carver, who's calling D'Angelo on the phone to kind of find out to make sure that that's D'Angelo and this is the one they're using. And what struck me about this one, and I'll bring it up here in a second, what struck me about this image is he's actually doing what he calls the Korean counterman, right? Where he's like talking in a kind of bad accent and trying to get D'Angelo to kind of talk, or else just to establish that so D'Angelo pick it up. But it reminds me of one of the audio episodes that we have in DS106. So there's an audio episode that's basically premised on you calling, or no, you making an order at McDonald's in an accent. And it's a very fun episode, and it's one we should look at as we get into audio in week 4, or at least the beginnings of audio. But it also reminds me of we could do a play on that for The Wire. Right? Like we could think about how we could do these phone calls and this different kind of codes to play with The Wire. So I'm thinking about reworking that kind of McDonald's order in the accent for some of the Wire stuff, especially with the phone. I imagine we can come up with some good episodes. So I'm also watching these episodes now thinking of assignments and thinking of cool assignments. And I think students should too. They should start thinking of what would be a fun assignment, visual, design, etc. And this will probably be easier to kind of wrap your head around once we start doing them. But given I've done them for 3 or 4 years, I probably have a better sense. But there's a lot that I'd love to see done with specific Wire assignments.
Yeah, the idea is, what would you like to make out of this?
Yeah.
And challenge the rest of the class to do the same thing, see what they can make out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, as an aside on that moment, just a quick aside, I was speaking with a professor here at Mary Washington, Zach Whalen, and he knows a gentleman who's actually one of the more prolific Twitter bot creators. And he created a bot, I think, for Twitter or for Tumblr, I think it was Tumblr, that actually takes all of the first 13 episodes of season 1 of The Wire and makes animated GIFs of them that write the text that they're saying. And it's on a Tumblr blog, and I'm going to find it and link it when we post this episode, but it's supposedly this, and I followed the Tumblr for a while, and every day it comes out with a new animated GIF of a particular part that actually not only does the animated GIF of a scene, but includes the text of what they're saying. So it's interesting to think about that as a form of storytelling about The Wire in a very kind of bot manufactured way, but it's compelling. So that's another one that came up today. And I'm actually thinking about trying to get that person to come talk to us about how he understands Twitter bots and the like as a form of storytelling.
Yeah, it's sort of like post-human storytelling.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's really like that.
yeah.
And
Someone was talking about post-human poetry. There's like a Twitter bot that catches tweets that are in iambic pentameter and then finds another one that rhymes with it and puts it right after it. I have no idea how that works, but
yeah, and it's interesting because one of the things that I think is interesting about that, and the Tumblr is wirescenes.tumblr.com, so it's wirescenes.tumblr.com, and it's just basically scenes that were made, taken automatically from The Wire that create these kind of visuals. And some of them work better than the other, but like you said, it's kind of this post-human poetry. It's this post-human analysis in some ways, based on data. It's really interesting.
I mean, it sort of like goes back to William Gibson and Neuromancer. I think there was an AI that was making these art things, which sort of inspired that whole story or started it rolling. So
Very cool.
take this back to the wire. um,
Yeah.
this is another shot that I liked. Um, Here we're looking down on the guy who's like watching the ground stash while the people at the end of the alley are like making the deal. Um, and Bubbles is actually going to try to fish the bag out from inside that tire. Um, but it's just like a striking perspective to look straight down on this thing.
Yeah.
Kind of like Avon and Stringer looking down on the basketball court, but Bubs is playing a different game here.
Well, yeah, and a very dangerous game, as he notes, and it's one of the things that helped him clean up this episode. It's an interesting perspective we get at several episodes, which is actually looking down on the projects and then cutting up to Baltimore's sky scene or a skyline. So it's a scene we see sometimes, particularly in transition. But this one, it's particular perspective about the caper, as he calls it. And it's a sad scene when he gets away with it, but then you get to see this other innocent kind of person caught in the crossfire and getting beaten technically to death with a bat. I don't know if the guy dies, but it's a terrible scene.
Yeah, and I took the audio for that scene too, and it's not playing through very well, but maybe we'll get back to that as in the radio episode. But the thing about that is, you hear what's going on in the background, the cussing and the beating, but then there's all these other sounds with it, like there's a dog barking, there's a train coming, there's like sirens that are going off, and all that like heightens the mood and adds to the tension and puts so much more into it,
Yeah, absolutely does. And you talked about that also with the final scene. Just the cited sources from the environment are starting in some ways to really create this kind of palette of experiences that begin to start to blur in some really creative, almost artistic ways. So what he's saying is they're citing all these sources, and you pointed it out with the final scene. The car alarm and the police sirens start to blend almost seamlessly with the phone and the kind of phone sounds.
Beeping, yeah.
That's right. And so there's this really gorgeous kind of symphony of sounds that are starting to create a sense of the world in which we find ourselves. And that final scene of Omar taking a shot at Avon and missing does kind of harken back to his quote from the previous episode, right? When you take a shot, best not miss, and he does. So yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. Another one, and we can't go too long. I think I mentioned it already a little bit, but another shot, and I want to show the whole video scene, but I'm not gonna. I'll just include the section I got of it from the video, so I'll include it there. But this is the one of Freeman, who's really starting to come on now as the character that we're going to begin to know and love. And not only is he going after, I want to say Charlene, but that's the wrong name, right?
Chardine.
It's not Chardine. So they're kind of shaking down Chardine in order to find out, more from them. And they're scaring her a bit, but not. There's a relationship there that's starting to burgeon. But also he's training Sydnor and Presbalewski in this scene, and this is one of those great scenes where he's talking to them about you follow the drugs, you get the drug dealer. You follow the money, and you don't know where you're going to go. And he sees this as his opportunity to not only do some real police work, but to blow open, sky high potentially, the deep levels of corruption. And it's his argument, and I think a lot of people in this day and age would believe it and would kind of completely agree that you're not going to get to the real issue until you can and do follow the money. And Daniels is petrified by this idea. He is fully petrified because he's already had a little run-in with Burrell when it came to bringing that $20,000 in that was going to Senator Davis. And when you do real police work, there's the question is what's the limit? Like we're starting to come into some real, institutional limits of what's allowed.
Yeah. Yeah, if I think back to Freeman, because he spent 13 years and 4 months basically in the hole
Yeah.
um, for trying to do police work, it probably doesn't bother him at all to take down anybody above him in the department.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's a dangerous cop because he's a very good cop. And there's that montage where he's teaching Sidnor and Prez how to be good police, but he's saying, like, here's what you need to do. You need to go to the public records office. You need to go to the elections office. And you need to basically figure out how this links to this. It's always Freeman bringing us back to doing good police work, is to doing the job, is to connecting the details. He's training not only Prez and Sidnor and anyone else who will listen, like Herc and Carver, but he's training us as watchers, as the audience, to think closely about these details and to think about, like, it isn't just about, the kind of drugs on the street and what gets traded. It's about what that money generates and where it's going and why. And that's a bigger question that's not anywhere really in the scene. It's this abstract space that's happening outside of the frame, and I'm compelled by that.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Another shot I pulled out, and this is, again, maybe not a key scene or anything like that. Um, but I just love the image, the silhouette, just a few details there tell you the whole picture.
Yeah.
And it's really artistic, in the way that it's composed, in the way it's lit, in the way it's put in there. As I said in the blog, the show takes a very realistic, almost documentary feel, but you always find time for shots like these, or what was going on in the sound at the end.
Yeah.
Um, as you said, making it into like a symphony. Um, and it's really operating on two levels there, I think.
I think it's right. And it's
Yeah.
operating on several levels with, so many things: the text, the visuals, the set
Yeah.
designs. They're not simple, right? And this idea of also quoting between episodes, right? Like maybe we won, referring to the drug war that happened 3 or 4 episodes earlier. That comment was made, and some might say it's an offhanded comment, but all the pieces matter again. And it's also, this is the episode where we get a quote that you brought up in a previous episode. That idea of, stupid criminals make stupid cops. And Jimmy says that because Jimmy's compelled by the game. He wants to figure it out. He likes that they're good. He likes that they're cautious. And he doesn't care what Avon Barksdale looks like, because that scene you just showed was Daniel's dejected because Avon Barksdale was smarter than him. He knew what was going on, and he was like, da, da, da. And I think Avon Barksdale is an interesting figure in this episode because he shows how cautious and how hard he is and why he's the king. Omar takes a shot at him, misses. Daniels takes a shot at him, misses. Right? He is a good criminal. He likes that, right? Yeah. Jimmy appreciates that.
Yeah. 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 He's like a worthy adversary for him, right? Yeah.
And it's kind of like Avon's game day. He starts out in the boardroom looking out over the policeman. He doesn't have his day, he doesn't have his day winning the game. And there's this kind of offhanded comment Prop Joe makes about it's not Avon's day. I took $100,000 from him. You're about to kill him. But in some ways it was, right? Because Avon proved, like he said to Weebay at the beginning of the episode on The Wire, that this stuff, you better be cautious because you don't think there's someone out there ready to get me, right? His whole mentality of being cautious and using, we have rules, he says to Orlando at some point, right? That's why we have rules, right? Like, that's such a brilliant scene. Another brilliant offhanded comment that reinforces just why Avon is where he is. I mean, I appreciate Avon as a character and as a kind of figure, because he kind of goes, he flies in the face that this is just some sort of anarchic, drug trade that no one really controls, and it comes out of everywhere by a bunch of junkies. This is a well-organized machine that's producing up to $20 to $25 million a year. We learn in this episode.
Yeah.
This is big business.
Yeah, and I guess that brings up something about Avon's character too, because as they bring up in the episode, he shows no flash.
Yeah.
He's not living rich. I mean, he's
Yeah.
not hurting for anything, but he's not acting like a guy who's got millions.
Yeah.
So, what is his game? And I don't know if that's ever really spelled out.
I don't think it is. It's a really good question, and he's smart, and I think Stringer Bell ultimately takes the spotlight in this. But Avon's paying off all the politicians, right? Like that's what we learn early on, and I wonder what his game is. He's collecting property, he's collecting businesses, and I think you're right. I think what is his game is never truly fleshed out, except maybe when they have to go to the mattresses in a later season. He kind of comes out with that a little bit more. But I think that's a really good point. What is Avon's game? I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe it's just to perpetuate it, right? We saw his uncle who took the bullet, um,
Yeah.
and his sister sort of says, if D'Angelo wants to step up, Avon will step down, later on.
Yeah.
So, yeah, maybe it's just the family thing. I don't know.
Yeah. It's interesting. He's like, because Joe Murphy made that great triple troll quote where he likened from the second season Ziggy to Fredo Corleone, and then to Marlon Brando's character in on the waterfront.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was such a great triple troll quote where you're kind of likening this notion to Corleone to the father, and it maybe maybe you can liken Barksdale to whatchamacallit, I'm forgetting his name, the Al Pacino character in The Godfather. I'm forgetting his particular name.
Michael, right?
Michael Corleone, right? So he's like, but Avon isn't as well drawn as some other characters sometimes, and maybe that's the actor. I don't know exactly why that is, but sometimes you got to dig deep for Avon, at least the first time around, because people like Prop Joe and Stringer Bell and D'Angelo are such great characters, and Omar and Bubbles. They're such great characters that sometimes Avon gets a little bit lost. And I'm not arguing like that's a great oversight on part of everybody, but I have this special place in my heart for Avon.
Yeah.
As a character, mind you. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like they can get overdrawn, like but it's interesting.
Yeah, well, like the special place in your heart. There is something about all the bad guys that's likable.
Yeah.
In a way, that the good guys, a lot of the police, just don't have.
Well, and there's something about the idea of Avon having all of this pressure on him now that he is the king. And how do you manage that? Like, you see Omar coming after him, and I think that's one of the things, like his cautiousness, the fact that, he sees the 911 call, and immediately he's questioning whether Weebay would give him a 911 call if he just went out for that food. Like I like the fact that he carries the weight of the world on his shoulders, and he has to, because, he's the one. And I guess I'm fascinated by a character like that there's no escaping once you're there. And that car ride with Weebay, where Weebay's like, why are you bugging out? You're being paranoid. And he's like, what, nobody wants to kill me? I'm not on anyone's list? Like, he's right. And I'm really compelled by that notion that he comes up with, that, once you're at that, it's as much like you're the man as much as it's hell. Right? The power can be great and it can be complete hell.
Yeah, yeah. Or maybe, if we think back to true crime, like William Fly,
yeah,
you get the idea that he knew once he became a pirate that he was going to end up on a rope, or fed to the sharks. Like there's no coming out of this alive. It's just be a gentleman of leisure while you can.
or how long you can survive. And that was the
Yeah.
pirates' mentality. And it's interesting how that, but you'll see it on Avon's face when he gets shot at by Omar that he doesn't want to die. Like, not that anyone does, but I think everyone who entered the game entered it with the idea that it's not going to last forever. And you're right. And that's the whole idea that D'Angelo was talking about with the chess and pawns, and they usually don't last, right? But at the same time, that realization comes, and then you do what Avon does, right? You're super precautious, and you take all the precautions you can because you don't want to die.
Yeah.
And that's the end game. I don't know. Maybe that's overstated, but
Yeah.
it's interesting.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
So I think that'll do it for episode 9. We've got 3 or 4 more in this series, first season.
I think it goes to 13.
Okay.
So by week 2, we'll get through just about the end of season 1.
All right.
Yeah,
and hopefully we'll get some of our Wire 106 crew in on some of these discussions.
I think that's the goal for the discussions and for the lunches. I'm going to start setting up the lunches when we set out the meeting for week 2, when the schedule for week 2.
Okay.
All right.
All right. So that'll do it for this week.
You got it.
All right.
Bye-bye, Paul.
See ya.
Wire 106.